Collectford, and as I revealed earlier, I spent most of my night last night reading a fabulous book. It is called, it's right here, it's called Disbanded Nation, and it's the author is joining us here today to talk a little bit about the book. His name is David Odhiambo. Hello, David. How you doing?
Hello.
Welcome to Daytime.
What an engrossing book. Boy, it just pulls you along. It was fabulous. Tell everybody what it's about, a little bit of the plot.
Well, it's the story of Benedict Ochieng, who is a Kenyan student at UBC, just graduated, and wants to be a musician. So he ends up hanging out in the city. His student visa expires, and ultimately has to go into hiding. And he hides in this apartment on the east side, or it's more a flop house, I shouldn't say apartment. What ends up happening is, at the beginning of the book, we meet him where he's in a quandary, figuring out how he's going to deal with the circumstances. He's broke, and the music isn't really happening for him in the city.
Now, it's a fascinating story in itself, but the other thing that stands out with this book is the style that it's written in. It's very
I just want to read, speaking of the style, it was described on the back of the book, which of course I read first, and I'd never heard anything quite described as a trip-hop, polyrhythmic, exquisitely wonderful book. Now, is this a style that you found is the best way for you to write? It's very musical.
Well, I was looking at a number of things when I started to write the book. Looking at how, with the history of the novel, which essentially starts around the 16th century with Elizabethan writing, there was a standardized version of the book that developed in the 19th century with people like Henry James, Jane Austen, and I was trying to figure out how I was, as someone who grew up in an oral culture, very different history, was going to just become a part of that story in terms of being a writer. And therefore I developed a relationship to language and to structure that looked at a lot of the innovative things that are happening with multimedia and tried to do something that ended up being this book.
It's written very much like a conversation, I guess. Like I almost found myself having to relearn how to read when I was reading it, because it was like a conversation in my head. Is that what you were going for mainly? Is the conversational tone?
Well, I think I was trying to communicate. Right. So I'm glad it was conversational.
It was. Well, for me it was anyway.
Yeah.
It might be different for different generations or people of a different age group, I guess. What we're going to ask you to do, because I think now that we've talked about it stylistically a little bit, people might want to hear a little bit about what you're talking about. So if you'd be kind enough, did you pick a passage to read?
Sure.
Excellent.
And David Odhiambo is going to be kind enough to read us a passage from the book that we've been speaking about called Disbanded Nation.
Benedict tips out the door, the night dour and skanky with a rumba of traffic, warily adjusting a long, slick, multicolored patch leather jacket to cover ears, collecting himself before tilting forward, falling into rain's cool viola sting. Corduroy belled bottoms clap uncomfortably at chilled flesh as he drunkenly meanders west on Davy Street, steam rising gently off sallow tarmac, a distant light peering green through the onset of fog. Nostrils pick up the stench of tobacco dyed into clothes as it no longer rains, just this cold stillness that is long shadow, the lean and linger of tree, light from street lamps and dented moon glistening and discolored by autumn leaves.
Beautiful. That's what we're talking about in terms of language. That's incredible.
And your book takes us on a kind of a 3-week window in the life of your character, Benedict. How much of the character is part of you?
Well, as I was saying earlier, the broad strokes, the structure that I used is based on me. I'm from Kenya, and I went to a boarding school, and there's a flashback sequence in the book that examines an aspect of Benedict's childhood that takes place in a boarding school. But I also wanted to move away from just journaling, and I wanted to imagine. So I created a character that functioned within the context of a world that I wanted to evoke.
But it gives a wonderful idea of the experience of someone trying to deal with different cultures within themselves and that they've had to deal with. You must have experienced that personally as well, coming to Canada and your boarding school experiences in Kenya.
Well, yeah, you know, I still think I'm a little bit dazed, and I've been here for over 20 years. And that is, I grew up in an environment and that I look back on, I guess, rather nostalgically now, but where I was familiar with smells, sights, sounds, and those were a part of me. And then in leaving that behind, the complete loss of that, I found that I was grappling for years, and that's, I think, why I started to write. Mm-hmm. It was a way of making sense of that transition.
When you capture so much of that so vividly in your writing as well.
Thank you.
Your past and what's happening to you now as well. Wonderful.
And it is Black History Month in February, and you do a lot of speaking with children. Is there anything in particular that you do to celebrate Black History Month?
I read a lot and try and sort of reflect on the history. I think one thing I didn't know is that there was a person named Carter Woodson, and he was responsible for just the month. In 1926, he was the person that came out and said we needed to take some time to reflect. And so what I'm doing this year is I'm going to be going into some schools and reading, and also I'm going to be doing something at Chapters Books on the 19th, where I'm going to read as well.
February.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good stuff. And if you see this book in the bookstores, pick it up. It is a wonderful, different kind of book, but very musical and enjoyable. Thank you so much, David, for joining us today.
Appreciate you coming by. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk to cinematographer and Genie nominee Glenn McPherson about the film.